The COVID-19 pandemic has taken a nasty turn for the worse, recording an explosive second wave of infections in Singapore. Hi everybody, I hope you're taking care of yourselves and your loved ones during this difficult period. I also want to take a moment to express, on behalf of my colleagues in the SDP, my profound gratitude to all our frontline workers, medical staff, cleaners, police, quarantine officials, and others who do battle with the virus every day to keep us safe. Thank you. Now today I want to talk with you about a subject that's been weighing on my mind, something which I've been putting off and hoping not to have to bring up. But the situation has gotten to a point where we cannot avoid it any longer. It has to do with the PAP taking its eye off the ball and causing a massive second wave of infections. You know, when the outbreak first hit our island, SDP decided that we needed to help bring people together and support the PAP's effort to tackle the COVID spread. And we did this repeatedly in our posts and announcements. We wanted to put aside party politics, and we did. We held off our criticisms and called on our fellow citizens to cooperate with the authorities. We even cancelled our plans to celebrate our 40th anniversary. We had booked the ballroom at Raffles Town Club and even paid the deposit. Now please note the date, February the 8th. It was still relatively early stages of the spread. But even then, we decided not to proceed with the event just to be on the safe side. And for a time, the nation's effort paid off. The number of infections slowed to a crawl, 1 or 2 cases a day, even registering 0 cases for one of the days in February. We had the disease on the ropes. But instead of putting in extra measures to finish it off, the government got complacent. On 2nd of March, PM Lee Hsien Loong said to Singaporeans, "It's a good time to visit or revisit our local attractions. Jewel Changi Airport has waived entrance fees to its Canopy Park till end March. If you're worried about travel restrictions, consider a staycation at a local hotel. Above all, let us go about our lives as normally as possible." And one supporter said, "Excellent advice, dear PM." Another one reported, "Nice to note that people are flocking back to shops and eateries. Slowly but surely. Had family dinner at East Coast Lagoon Food Centre last Saturday, very crowded. Took us a while to find a spot. What a relief. No moaning, haha." Worse, the PAP started playing politics with the situation by releasing the election boundaries report and saying that it would call for election in the midst of the outbreak. Incredibly, the PAP Women's Wing organized a function on 7th March and gathered together all of these people into an enclosed space and proceeded to talk about introducing its candidates in the next GE. Can anyone be any more irresponsible? That same day, Bukit Batok MP Mr. Murali got together a whole group of elderly people who, by the way, are the most vulnerable age group as far as infections are concerned, for a dinner where no one practiced social distancing. These events took place after a cluster of infections happened at a dinner at Safra Jurong. And despite this, PAP ministers and MPs saw it fit to organize mass gatherings, all while DOSCON Orange was on. And I remind you that these events were held 1 month after the SDP cancelled our dinner on 8th February. Then the unthinkable happened. Cases started to come back, and towards the second half of the month, the number of new infections exploded with a vengeance, registering 40, 50 cases in a day, with a record of 73 cases as at the recording of this video. And many of these cases were unlinked, locally transmitted cases, not just imported cases. And then there was the decision to allow Malaysian workers to come into Singapore to continue their work without quarantine, despite the Malaysian government's decision to close its borders and impose a lockdown in the country. And get this, the PAP even provided them financial support to work here. Now, don't get me wrong, I have many Malaysian friends and even relatives who work here. But you're talking about a very dangerous situation. You're talking about 300,000 Malaysians working in Singapore. How many of them were infected and living and working among us? How many of the latest infections were from these workers? Now, the PAP may say that our factories, offices, and services, which are heavily dependent on these workers, need to continue to operate. But which is more important, making money or protecting our health? In Hokkien, we say, "Ai lui, mai mia." The government also inexplicably let in an Indonesian man who was already ill to enter Singapore to seek treatment. He was confirmed to have COVID-19 and subsequently passed away. And by that time, he had already infected a 62-year-old Singaporean. On top of this, foreigners from other countries with work passes continued to be allowed into the country. It was only on 23rd March that restrictions were tightened to ban short-term visitors. Many of these foreigners were subsequently confirmed to be infected. Initially, these travelers, including Singaporeans, who returned from overseas were not quarantined but only issued stay-home notices. In other words, they could have mingled with family members and passed on the virus and beyond. All these could have contributed to the dangerous escalation of cases that we are witnessing now. It's only now that the PAP starts to react by tightening rules to stop public gatherings, closing tuition centers, and practicing social distancing. Now, these measures are clearly a more reactive than proactive stance. They are piecemeal and ad hoc. Tuition centers are closed down, but schools remain open, and workplaces are ordered to practice social distancing and a 10-person limit on gatherings imposed, but MRT trains are jam-packed with people having to travel to work. Now, these inconsistencies are causing confusion and uncertainty among the public, making it even more difficult for the country to get a firm grip on the crisis. But even with all these, I want to remind everyone to please cooperate with the authorities. If it's not for the PAP, then let's do it for the frontline workers who are so valiantly striving to keep us safe at their own personal risk. As I said, we didn't want to turn the situation into a political matter. Now, it is the PAP that is politicizing the crisis by insisting on calling for an election in the midst of the outbreak. The ministers say that they are giving their all and focusing 100% on trying to bring the disease under control. If they are giving 100%, then how are they finding time to go out campaigning and preparing for elections? Even Mr. Lee Hsien Loong was seen at his constituency in what appeared like him giving out hand sanitizers. Now, mind you, this is despite the authorities calling for us to practice social distancing. And because they took their eye off the ball, started dividing their attention between handling the outbreak and taking care of themselves in an election, things started to go wrong with the second wave, which is already showing to be many times larger than the first. It got cocky, opportunistically capitalizing on the public's goodwill, saying that it would call for elections even as our country is reeling from a disastrous second outbreak. Now, I can only hope that the PAP has learned its lesson and will not drop the ball a second time by calling for the GE before the pandemic is over. But knowing the PAP, I am not hopeful. If it goes ahead with the elections in the midst of this crisis, it will make one thing plain. The PAP cares more about its own interests and its power than the well-being of the people. I've explained to you these facts and cited you dates and times of what happened or what was said so that you can verify what I've told you. I do this because I want to reason with you and not spew hateful rhetoric. I don't want you to hate the PAP, but to be pragmatic, that while we have the PAP as government, you must also keep it in check with an effective opposition in Parliament. Tell Mr. Lee Hsien Loong that he is taking unacceptable risks by calling for a GE before the crisis is over. There is a time and place for everything. Now is not it, especially when we have more than a year before the GE needs to be held. Tell him to stop playing politics when our lives and our health are at stake. Share this video as widely as you can. This is the only means I have to communicate with you because the PAP controls the newspapers and TV stations. In the meantime, please take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and let's cooperate with the guidelines and beat this virus. We are Singaporeans, and we will overcome.